Hello, everyone. It is Jenny and Laurie of Astropath. We are here to do another in our series, People in the News, Spectrum of Experience. And we are, like the title of it says, we're doing People in the News. So today, who are we talking about today, Jenny?
We're going to talk about Bernie Sanders today.
All right, Bernie
Yes,
Sanders.
that's right.
And before we jump into that, we want to make an announcement that we're going to be doing another drawing for another little video that we're going to make for one of you about your chart. It's going to be a similar format to what we're doing here with these videos. So, what you need to do to get in the drawing is you need to leave us a message below this video. And in the message, I want you to give us one or two names of people you'd like to see us talk about.
Hmm.
And that's all you need to do. And we will pick one person and do a video for you. So be sure to leave us a message.
Yeah. And our last person, Beth, wrote us a note to say that she really benefited from the recording that we did for her, which we were really excited about because that's what we hope for people to get. So just want to mention that we have had one successful one of those. So you might be the next lucky person. So, yep.
Yes. All right. So anything else, or are we ready to jump right into Bernie?
No, let's talk a little bit about, Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is the senator from Vermont. He's been traveling the country in his anti-oligarch tour. And so he's been in the news a lot. He's been interviewed on CNN and some other places, and he is an independent. He is not a Democrat. He's kind of been on his own for a while in that way, and he's really coming from that perspective. So that is essentially, yeah. I mean, that's just a quick thing about Bernie. Yeah.
And the other thing, before we dive into this chart, we want to make it really clear. We do not have an accurate birth time for Bernie. I have seen several people use a particular birth time, but nobody's really sure. And I think if we do not have a clear birth time, it is better to do what we've set up here, which is called a sunrise chart. In a sunrise chart, we have the date, which we know is correct. Bernie was born on September 8th, 1941, and we put the sun right conjunct the ascendant. And that's the chart we use. And one of the reasons we decided to do Bernie is just to let people know that there is a lot of information that can be gotten through a chart, whether you have the birth time or not. Some people just simply don't. If you were born in certain countries, I mean, even England, they do not, there's no requirement of the birth time on birth certificates.
Right.
So in case you're someone who thinks, oh no, astrology can never work for me because I don't have my birth time. That's not true. We can't, there's a lot that can be done. There is some stuff lost, but that's
Mhm.
what we're using for Bernie is a sunrise chart.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, basically, that gives you that clue that right away, you're thinking about the sun rising on that day, 5:37 a.m. in Brooklyn, New York. And there's like Lori's saying, there's so many things. You can still look at all the aspects. One of the important things you're going to want to look at is the moon, because you do want to know if the moon changes sign. If you have somebody's birth chart, you don't know their time, that's going to be really key. And with Bernie, the absolute earliest degree that moon in Aries could have been was 13 degrees, and the latest was somewhere around 25. So we know that we definitely have an Aries moon. And not only that, but we do know that no matter what, it's close enough to Mars to count as probably a conjunction, but at the very least a co-presence. And we'll get more into what that means. But there's so many things you can tell from a sunrise chart. Focus on the aspects. You can still look at the moon phase for the most part. You just don't have the rising sign, and you can't use the house system. You just don't know the house system, which represents areas of life. But that said, you can still get so much information. So let's go ahead and let's jump in.
Yeah, you certainly can. And there have been many times where I'll just use a sunrise chart if I don't have a time. And even if you use the houses, they're going to work.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because that person was born on that day, and this shows the beginning of that day. Anyway, if we slip into houses, it doesn't get totally wonky. I just want to say that, I guess. Um,
Yeah, I just said, yeah, just the point is you can still get so much information. So,
right, right,
um,
right.
well, anyway, let's. let's start with the should we start with the obvious things, the sun and Virgo?
Yeah, let's start with the sun and moon. We've got that very lovely sun and moon, and right there near the nodes,
Yeah.
the North Node as well. So Virgo, with all signs, there's a positive and a more challenging manifestation of that sign. Virgo is the sign of it's the mutable earth sign. It's very much about service. I think service is the main point of Virgo itself. Virgo just has such a perspective of um, potential. And
Mhm.
I think that's one of the things you see in Bernie. He just knows the potential of things. And his moon in Aries brings in all this anger when we're not reaching our potential. I think that's like
Yeah.
such a huge piece of just those two and how they come together and how we see them so clearly in him.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about Virgo, just because I think that word service also can be a loaded term, and there might be a lot of misunderstanding about what service is. And I think service, in my opinion, from the Virgo standpoint, is this ability to look around and discern what is needed, what are people struggling with, what do people need, and then sort of making a list and being like this and this and this and this, and then even if you're thinking about a Virgo person seeing that somebody is hungry, for example, then the Virgo way of doing service is okay, that person's hungry. I need to go and make a shopping list. I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to buy the things. I'm going to go home. I'm going to cook it. I'm going to make it. And then I'm going to make sure that person gets it. I'm going to bring it to them. So these very practical steps of the step by step breakdown of how that person is going to get helped. That's what I think of with Virgo and the idea of service, which is so I don't know, maybe misunderstood in capitalist society, but really it is a huge part of humanity, of just helping one another, just very simple helping one another. And I do think that each of us deep down, or maybe more on a surface level, wants to help, wants to help other people. You see, somebody fall down in the street, you want to help them up. I mean, I think a lot of people do. And if you don't, it's more, there might be a need to kind of dig down into that. But that's what I think of with Virgo a lot of. And then when you put his Virgo sun next to the North Node, also in Virgo, it makes a couple statements. One, he's born near an eclipse. So he is an eclipse chart, which cues us to the idea that eclipses might have a bigger impact on Bernie. They might show more relevant pivot points. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is just bringing together the sun and the North Node. So his Virgo sun and the overall direction of his life is very tightly tied together. So the more he can radiate with that, sun of his and really be a beacon of this type of ethos, then he's doing the thing he is here to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is a chart that just pushes him further and further into this practical space of understanding. And I think you used the word discerning what is needed and figuring out how to deliver that. And all of that kind of coming from a spiritual perspective, and whether he would identify it that way or not. The South Node being in Pisces, I kind of doubt if he would view it that way. Jenny and I are both from Burlington, Vermont. We've both met Bernie. I've known Bernie since he became mayor of Burlington in 1981. And yeah, I could go a long ways with that conversation, but I will stop there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't think he would necessarily say that his service comes from a spiritual perspective, but there's some way that he just has this deep, deep understanding that is um, an intuitive understanding that he brings to the table that really supports him in discerning what is
Yeah.
needed. And one of the reasons I don't think he would um, say that it comes from a spiritual place. There's no water in this chart.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
interesting to think of that Bernie doesn't have water, which is, I think, one of the things that kind of enables him to push as hard as he does. He doesn't get pulled back into emotion. He sees what's needed and he's moving toward it. You know, that,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the not having water because it makes me just think, well, but the water's in the South Node, which almost means it's overlooked. Like he came into the life with that automatic understanding, and he may not have even identified it as something that he came into because it's so innate, and that's something the South Node represents. The other thing I'm just thinking, looking at this Virgo, is just this is an incredibly hardworking person. And when I say that, I mean maybe even to a fault. Like I do remember hearing about how Bernie is a bit of a workaholic, really driving hard. And so that can actually, that hard driving part of him can also be part of what I know has frustrated people who have actually worked with him is because he works so hard that he expects everyone else to be at that level. There's a certain idealism associated with that. And so I think that just because we're really talking about the spectrum of experience here, and I think that, we're talking about all the goodness of Virgo, but there's also these harder edges to it. Virgo can be very critical, and it can be very like, like really drilling in and be judgmental. And in some ways that can serve him, and in other ways that might make him work difficult to work with on a more personal level. So I just want to point that out. But no matter what, hardworking, super hardworking and driven. I mean, look at him. He's what is he, 84
He's
almost?
84. He's having his, this June, he's having his Uranus return.
Yeah, damn.
His Uranus is at 0 degrees Gemini.
Yeah,
Uranus is just going to be at 0 degrees Gemini this summer. So he's at his Uranus return. This is the completion of a huge part of his life, 84 years old. Uranus coming back to its natal position. It's a pretty interesting period of time. And if you track that cycle, I bet, yeah, I'm going to do that later. At any rate, I think, the whole piece that you're talking about the workaholism, and the difficulty to work with, this is not a warm, fuzzy man.
mm,
We can say all the great things we want about Virgo, but it's not what you think of as warm and fuzzy. It's
mm,
discriminating, it's exacting, it's going to push things. And that square to Jupiter, I think, really speaks to that, the need to work for the beliefs, for the higher
yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
And, I mean,
Intellectual understanding too, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
and just they I just want to pick up on that word discriminating you use. I just want to make that clear. Discriminating in the sense of being able to separate the wheat from the chaff. We're not talking about being discriminating by making judgments about people. We're talking about being able to discern what are the important components of something in that context. Just want to make that clear.
Discernment is probably the better word.
Yeah.
Discriminating brings in a whole different,
Yeah.
yeah,
Even
just,
though it means that's right in the context. But anyway, as a word person, just want to point that out.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because I really definitely learned that word discriminating when I was early studying astrology. And it's one of those things that the word really, yeah, has a different connotation at this point than it
Yeah,
did 50 years ago, even.
true. Well, all right. So we've kind of broken apart that part. I think the next thing really is let's talk about that, the moon in Aries near Mars. I think so. When you have a moon in Aries, you have this incredible drive. I mean, the Aries sign is the sign that refers to ignition. It's the whole beginning of the zodiac. It's fast and it's furious and it's very motivated all the time. And that's why part of the title here, the Fury, that we brought in is very much this Mars moon conjunction in Aries. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I
pretty
mean, Mars rules Aries. So you know that Mars, it's really interesting. When I think of Mars and Aries, I think, oh, this person is going to do anything they humanly can do to get what they think is right,
mhm.
what they're pushing toward. And you see him, yeah, at almost 84 years old or whatever he is, how that drive, that is a powerful drive, and you bring the emotion into it as well. Yeah, you can imagine how hard this man is to work for. because
And
he probably gets angry at the drop of a hat. I wouldn't want to work for him. I love Bernie. I wouldn't want to work for him.
yeah,
You can just see how much passion and drive he puts into everything he does.
yeah. And if you think about the moon as the driving emotional need, that's the engine, that's driving that service oriented sun in a way, the emotional engine of like, no, this needs to be, this way, like really just being, there's a lot of vehemence, but it's what we need. Like we need this sort of vehemence right now because there's just not a lot standing up to the domination that's happening as well in the culture and in the government level in the United States. So I mean that's why he is this firebrand. I mean this brings that firebrand component. Like he's not afraid to say what needs to be said. He doesn't care what his hair looks like. He doesn't care if his suit's rumpled. He doesn't care if he's wearing fuzzy little wool mittens. He doesn't give a shit. He just cares about what he's here to do. His the force that he's ready to exert. Um, the other thing I want to mention about the Moon Mars conjunction is that Mars is stationing in this chart. There's a
Oh,
little
yeah.
S right next to Mars, and Mars is about to turn retrograde in this chart. And that brings anytime a planet is stationing and has that little S, it really elevates the status of that planet in the chart because it's something that's sitting there and it's going to stay there in that degree for a long time. And so it really imbues this chart with a even more powerful kind of Mars energy to it. And it's interesting because we're going to get into the Libra part as well in a minute, which is the juxtaposition of all of the Mars and the single-mindedness. We're gonna do this, and all the heat that's behind that. And then to have that Mars station, it's like it's not going anywhere. It is here to really make a statement. So I think that's why this is titled the way that it is. This is the fury part. So maybe we should get into the fairness part. What do you think, Laurie?
Well, I think, yeah, the Libra comes in. We mentioned that Mars is in its ruling sign in Aries, so that makes Mars so much stronger. But then Venus is also in its ruling sign of Libra, one of its ruling signs. So that really heightens the importance of Venus as well. And also in Libra, we've got Mercury, which is his voice, trined by Uranus. And there, yeah, he's going to say whatever it is for him to say. But I think I'm kind of zipping ahead. I think you want to talk more about Venus and Libra. So let me
Oh, I
shut up and let you
always
go.
Libra. Yeah. Well, I think just, to follow up, so we have Mars, and then Mars is right across from Libra. So not only are they both very strong in their own signs, but they are in an opposition. And even without the birth time, we know this because neither of those planets move quickly enough. But so that opposition really brings in this kind of, image to me of, yeah, of really the scales of Libra, the balancing act of like, yes, he's angry, and yes, he's, really forceful in the way he talks, and you can see that, and he's very concerned about justice. He's very concerned about fairness. He's very concerned about equality and equanimity and people having a fair shake. These are things that he finds incredibly important. And so this brings in Venus. And, I also think of Venus. Venus has her own little fierceness. I mean, she is the planet of harmony and balance, but she's also, if she thinks things are out of balance, woo, you better step aside because that is the feminine, fierceness of just like, so it
It's
really
a
brings that
cardinal
in.
sign. It's a cardinal
Yeah,
sign.
yeah,
Yeah, it looks like it's
yeah,
trying to balance everything, but when push comes to shove, this is a cardinal sign that wants to make things happen. These are both cardinal signs, Aries and Libra. We've got those two pulling in opposite directions or pulling together. The other thing about Mars and Venus is that they are in a mutual reception. No, they're not in a mutual reception. That's not what I meant to say. They are, if you look at the chart from the perspective of a dispositorship tree, they share the top space
mm,
because they are the only ones that are in their own sign. Everything else has to answer to one or the other of those two planets. They are the top dogs in this chart.
yeah,
So, yeah, fairness and fury, those two things are what make him who he is.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, I think there's an equal kind of they're both just as fierce, is what it seems like to me. They both are. And I think that's the center point of his chart. And you think about Venus and Mars essentially represent how you relate, how your motivation, your willpower of Mars, and then the Venus is, the relationship, the connection with people, and also connection with values and your values. So like when you bring those two things in together in this way, this is really the driving thing I see behind his chart. Is like, yeah, you got the Virgo Sun, but this is really something that's very active in those cardinal signs. It's pushing everything forwards because the Sun is mutable. The Sun's more changeable. These two pieces, though, they are very directed and very focused.
And it's
So,
it's funny when you think about, if you know much about Bernie, you know that he has basically had the same conversation since 1981. He has his focus has been so singular over the years. He's had different things to have to interact with because our political system has changed over time, but he's pretty single focused.
yeah. And I don't know, maybe how he ran. Like, did he run if he ran as a progressive, over time in Vermont? But I want to just make a little statement about the whole idea of the progressive and what he and AOC represent. It's like the original basis for progressivism is based on the progressive tax on the rich. So the idea that the more money you make, the more tax you should pay, the higher percentage you should pay, the more you should pay in. That's the essential, very simple backbone of anything that has now become part of the Progressive Party. And like, so you see that idea of fairness again. Like, no, you pay your fair share. And his tour right now that he's on, this, about the oligarchs, this is what this is about. This is about saying, hey, this isn't fair. All these people have all this money. They have so much money that they're able to just fleece the rest of us, And so that's what, I mean, it makes me infuriated. So like, Bernie's really channeling this and doing something about it and being, going and speaking up against this. And I think that that's really important. And
And
then when you put that, yeah, well, yeah, I'll digress.
yeah, well, when you put that Uranus in
Exactly.
a beautiful trine aspect to
Oh,
Mercury, he is speaking for the collective.
yeah.
That Uranus being one of the outer planets, one of the generational planets, he is speaking for the collective generation that's being robbed currently. And his voice is about fairness, and he is backing that up with all this drive of, Libra and Aries. It's really powerful. It's really interesting. In 1981, when he did run as a progressive, I'm pretty sure, in Burlington for that mayor, there had been a mayor of Burlington for many, 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 many years. It was like one dude that controlled the city of Burlington. And Bernie was just a young hippie kid, really. And he shocked the living daylights out of everybody by winning, and he
Mm,
never let go. That kind of also speaks to me. I always think with Aries, I think of a dog with a bone. Bernie won that election in 1981, and he has held on to this drive and pushing it in the way he has ever since. It's like he's
mm,
not going to let go of it until he's put in the ground.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, stood the test of time, And it's interesting too that it's Venus trines Jupiter. So you have that kind of, Mercury trining Uranus and then Venus trining Jupiter. It just makes it
Awesome.
bigger, just that's such a simple way to understand Jupiter.
Oh, that's
But yeah, I
lovely.
think that plays into some degree. But that Jupiter is really wired into the chart, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. I wasn't thinking about that until you put that out there. Yeah, that's trying. So yeah, Jupiter, thinking of Jupiter as his beliefs, this belief in fairness and yeah, trying to
Yeah,
work
I think.
work with that.
hmm And then the other one is just like his Mercury. I mean, he is this orator. That is how his ferocity comes across, right? Exactly. Sextile Pluto. So I mean, it's his voice here is what's kind of um really showing up when that, yeah, and his voice for the generation, exactly.
Yeah, the generational impact of his voice. There it is right there, that little sextile between Pluto and Uranus. and moving all of that energy of the collective through his voice. I do wish we had a birth time for him, but
Yeah,
there's a
it'd be
lot of
nice.
information here.
Yeah. And it would be nice to know. Yeah, I would really like to know where that Venus Mars opposition lands, you know? That would be an interesting understanding of where that falls. That would definitely give you some other layers of information.
That's
But
out
yeah,
of sign, but still,
yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily look at that, but that if we bring that into a conjunction, we've got all three of the outer planets connected with his Mercury.
yeah.
That's
I mean,
powerful.
it is, and yeah, you can quibble over orbs with that one or whatever, but like I still think it's relevant to make that statement because that's why I mean this kind of brings in why is he the one who's showing up at this time, and this is because of how he's harnessed this energy. The other thing that popped out to me just, well, yeah, I don't know. The other thing I wanted to say was just that Chiron, the asteroid there, which represents the wounded healer, that does appear to be the Oriental planet, like the planet that rises just before the sun. And even though we don't know its time of birth, you still know that.
Right.
And that, yeah, and those two, I mean, that's a really big statement. This kind of illustrates like a personal motivation, like a way that he is needed to kind of heal himself to expand his perspective. Pluto can be perspective sometimes. So bringing those two together, I think that's quite the statement. And yeah,
That is, and if you don't want to use Chiron, because some people would or wouldn't use Chiron in that regard, but if you don't use Chiron, then Pluto is going to be the easternmost planet, the planet that
yeah,
leads the sun into the sky in the morning, and that,
mhm,
like Noel Till called it a brushstroke. It
yeah,
would put power. I mean, what it would give to him is power.
yeah, yeah,
The power of the collective wound. That's what it gives him.
hmm,
Because that's
yeah,
a collective wound with that
yeah.
conjunction between Pluto and Chiron.
Hmm. And it's directly because it's in Leo, then it's sort of leaning into his sun, sort of looking to the sun because the sun rules Leo, and sort of saying, hey, sun, how do we do this? And the sun is like, well, we're going to do some service here. We're going to do some, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do what we can to help people on a practical level. And part of the practical level does have to do with money, which is part of his, focus of distributing wealth differently, seeing that as yeah, and that's a really,
That's really
really
powerful.
important statement in his chart that might not have been overtly obvious when I was first looking at this. And now I'm like, oh, okay, damn, that makes a lot of sense. It really shows some,
It really does. That's
yeah.
really lovely. I wish we had the time, but we don't, and we still got a lot of information out of it. So, is there anything else you want to say about this? I'm ready to kind of.
Oh, I mean, no, I think we've covered what we're doing for our purposes, and there's other. I think we've covered the main things, and hopefully the takeaway is really that understanding between the Mars, Moon, and Aries, and the Venus and Libra, because that's really the takeaway I think to understand. I mean, there's other pieces in there, but that really imbues the understanding or imparts the understanding, I should say.
And the other thing I hope that this demonstrated is that we can work with charts without a birth time.
Hmm.
You can
Yeah,
get a lot of information, you can get a lot out of it. You don't have to just ignore charts if you don't have a birth time. So
yeah,
there's
yeah.
that. And remember, leave us messages and you'll get into our little drawing where we will do this kind of a workup for your chart.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Jenny. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye.